Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we are undertaking a really critical deep dive. We're moving beyond what you might call the traditional literary analysis of Ernest Hemingway's monumental work, For Whom the Bell Tolls.
That's right.
We're not here to talk so much about the romance or the individual tragedy, as powerful as they are. We're here to examine the underlying mechanisms of ideological conflict, the systems at play.
Our mission today is to really look past the individual acts of heroism and, past that brief, intense human connection between Robert Jordan and Maria. And instead, we're going to focus pretty relentlessly on the systemic question.
Which is?
How does ideological war fundamentally transform individuals, people who often join a cause with this high moral purpose into mere instruments of strategy, loyalty, and ultimately sacrifice?
It's so crucial to get this from the start. This novel is just a stark, brutal exposure of how revolutionary systems actually operate. These systems, they don't just tolerate moral compromise.
No, they demand it.
They demand it. They require the execution of horrific acts, and these acts are immediately framed universally as, unavoidable necessities for the greater abstract cause. It's a ruthless, systemic accounting of the human cost required to run the machine of a revolution.
So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, we're focusing strictly on the universal patterns, on the organizational incentives and the command structures that are revealed in the text. Our goal is pure systems analysis. We want to observe how these mechanisms function, and we're going to be avoiding any moral judgments about the historical factions involved or, the personal virtue of the characters who are caught within this terrifying engine of war.
We're just tracking the flow.
We're tracking the flow of obligation, of belief, and of betrayal.
Oh.
Okay. Let's unpack this. I think the best place to start is to establish the context, which is, of course, the Spanish Civil War.
Absolutely.
Hemingway was there as a correspondent, and you can just feel that experience. It gave him this access to a ground-level truth that, it permeates every single page. This isn't just some historical backdrop for a story. It's the source code for the systematic realism we're trying to study here.
That's exactly right. The
Yeah.
Spanish Civil War, running from 36 to 39, it was a crucial systemic precedent. It was kind of a stress test for the global conflicts that were just around the corner.
A preview of World War II, in a way.
In many ways, yeah.
Yeah.
What you see here is the birth of modern proxy warfare. You have international forces and ideologies backing these deeply entrenched domestic factions. You see the deep internationalization of what really started as an internal struggle.
And it's just a brutal preview of the kind of guerrilla and resistance movements that would come to define so much of the 20th century.
In the novel itself, it emerges from this moment where, on paper at least, the moral lines were supposed to be completely clear.
Right. It was the good fight.
It was the good fight. The cause of the Republic, which is the side Robert Jordan is fighting for, it was framed globally as the fight against fascism. It was a crusade for liberty. But the brutal reality of the underground partisan work, the guerrilla system, it meant that systematic internal brutality was completely unavoidable, and often for all sides, even for the people ostensibly fighting for human freedom.
And that gap, that terrible chasm between the high-minded ideological cause and the ugly, disorganized necessity on the ground, that's exactly where the system starts to reveal its true nature, isn't it?
That's the whole game. Hemingway just strips away all the romanticism. So our central thesis for this deep dive is that the novel portrays war not as some kind of quest for moral clarity, which is what Jordan is desperately seeking, but as a relentless system, a system that operates almost like an economic engine.
An engine that takes this high-quality, pure fuel-like belief, conviction, idealism.
All good stuff.
All the good stuff. And it just converts it through sheer operational necessity into obligatory action.
Precisely. And in that conversion process, sacrifice becomes the only meaningful currency. The system demands that you pay. You pay in blood, you pay in moral debt, or you pay in the lives of the people you love. And the price is completely non-negotiable, regardless of your personal ethics.
And Robert Jordan, the American dynamiter who's come to fight for the Republic, he feels this tension from the very moment he gets his orders from General Goltz. That brings us directly into our core systems analysis. And I think we have to start with revolutionary warfare as a system that is just defined by expendability.
Yes.
Let's look really closely at the structure of command here because it's so deeply cynical from the outset. Goltz's plan is centralized, right? It's part of this massive offensive.
It is.
But his orders to Jordan, they feel like they're born of this deep systemic expectation of failure from that central authority.
You've hit it exactly. We see Goltz as this weary professional commander, and he's acknowledging the system's fatal weaknesses even as he's using it to send a man to his likely death.
He asks Jordan that famous question.
He does. Has any attack ever been as it should? I mean, that says it all. He knows that the grand plan, this thing that Vicente Rojo, the chief of staff, calls his masterpiece, with the perfectly drawn maps and timetables.
It looks great on paper.
It looks beautiful and complicated. But Goltz fully expects interference, delays, and sheer incompetence to just render it completely useless.
So it's the centralized military machine basically admitting its own unreliability right to its field operative.
Yes. Goltz knows the plan that was cooked up in Madrid is purely theoretical. And because of that, the incentive he places on Jordan is defined by absolute existential necessity and, crucially, timing.
And this timing it's ruthless. It's so precise.
Oh, it's surgically precise. Goltz makes it completely explicit merely to blow the bridge is a failure. That's not enough.
Right.
The bridge has to be destroyed after the attack starts, which will be confirmed by an aerial bombardment at a very specific time and not a single minute before.
And the logic there is to prevent enemy reinforcements, the tanks, the artillery, the trucks, from using that single road, which is absolutely crucial for the offensive into Segovia.
But the flip side of that, the corollary, is that if the main attack gets postponed, which Goltz deeply suspects it might be,
then Jordan's action is a total catastrophe.
A total catastrophe. The enemy just repairs the bridge, and the entire guerrilla band is hunted down and destroyed for absolutely nothing. That right there is the impossible burden of timing.
Wow. So Goltz is essentially just dumping the system's entire failure risk right onto the instrument, right onto Jordan.
That's the mechanism. He's telling Jordan, look, I know the system above me is unreliable. Therefore, your success has to be absolute and perfectly timed, or your life and the lives of this entire guerrilla band are completely wasted.
That is the core mechanism of revolutionary expendability right there.
It is.
So how does Jordan process that? I mean, he's an idealist, he's fighting for a cause, but he has to know he's just a piece of hardware in a really faulty machine.
He recognizes the human outcome instantly. It's self-subordination and total instrumentality. Jordan acknowledges he is an instrument to do your duty.
He accepts the role.
He has to. His personal dislikes or his moral misgivings about these orders, they have to be suppressed because, in the grand narrative of the Republic, the strategic objective trumps the individual. The bridge has to be destroyed because it can be the point on which the future of the human race can turn.
That phrase is just a fantastic illustration of the narrative justification at the highest level, isn't it? The sheer importance of the strategic objective just nullifies the individual's right to even critique the risk.
It's a complete systems reset of your personal conscience. But that self-subordination is also functional. I mean, Jordan is there because he believes the Republic offers the best shot for the future. He accepts this role of instrument because he believes in the larger system's goal, even if he completely distrusts the immediate administrators running it.
But the second he leaves that centralized command structure and enters the mountains, he runs headfirst into the next critical system. And this one operates on completely different incentives. I'm talking about the decentralized guerrilla faction run by Pablo.
And right there, the structures and the priorities, they just flip entirely. This is where the Revolutionary War system meets the primal system of self-preservation.
And Pablo's band, it operates like a localized, self-sufficient little economy, doesn't it? Their priority is not the distant war effort, taking Segovia.
No.
It's their own immediate survival and all their accumulated assets.
The resources become everything. Pablo's famous 5 horses, the weapons they've accumulated, the safety of their hidden cave, these become the real currency of loyalty for them. It's their localized capital.
Which shifts the incentive completely. It's all about local security over any kind of macro strategy.
And Pablo even articulates this. We could call it the principle of the fox. He says the key to long-term survival in the mountains is doing nothing that attracts attention.
Just lay low.
Lay low. So for him, the bridge mission is just this unacceptable risk that threatens to destroy their self-contained economic system and get them hunted out of these mountains by enemy planes and troops. His cynicism isn't about political ideology. It's about pure operational survival.
So that immediately creates this critical friction. If you're Robert Jordan and you're committed to the larger systemic goal that Galt's laid out, how on earth do you deal with a leader like Pablo, whose entire system is built on hoarding and risk avoidance?
Well, it creates instant factionalism. The old guide, Anselmo, who is just pure ideological devotion.
The true believer.
The true believer. He bitterly calls Pablo a capitalist Moor, someone focused only on his horses, while Anselmo is focused on the interests of all of humanity, that big abstract cause. This internal schism, this clash between the macro-military system and the micro-survival system, is ultimately the greatest threat to the entire mission.
It's so fascinating because the external enemy, the fascists, they're a constant threat, obviously. But the system shows that the internal conflict and these competing incentives, like Pablo stealing and then later returning the explosive components, are actually more destabilizing.
It's systemic entropy at work, absolutely. And Jordan sees the psychological signature of this systemic breakdown. He looks at Pablo's sadness and notes that it's the sadness they get before they quit or before they betray. That is the sadness that comes before the sellout.
So he reads Pablo's self-preservation instinct as a form of sabotage against the larger system.
He has to. It proves that within a revolutionary structure, individual self-interest, when it's amplified like that, it becomes the enemy.
But, I have to ask, and I'm sure some listeners are thinking this, isn't there a genuine argument to be made that Pablo's instinct is actually rational?
Oh, for sure.
If the centralized command, Galtz and Rojo, is so incompetent and prone to delay, wouldn't local safety be the smarter, long-term revolutionary goal? Why risk everything for a plan you know is probably going to fail from the top down?
And that is the critical friction that Hemingway introduces. Pablo is rational from a purely survivalist, localized perspective. There's no doubt about it.
Okay.
But the revolutionary system demands that that kind of rationality be suppressed by faith in the macro strategy. Jordan, despite all his intellectual reservations, has chosen the macro system. He believes that destroying the bridge, even if it wipes out the entire band, is a necessary action to keep the greater engine of the Republic running.
So Pablo represents the failure to subordinate that personal survival instinct.
The failure to subordinate it to the organizational necessity. And because of that, in the eyes of the system, he becomes a threat to the entire apparatus.
Let's shift gears a little bit to maybe a darker element, how ideology itself functions in this system, not as a moral safeguard that, keeps people in check,
Right.
but rather as a moral accelerator, something that drives individuals to commit what are essentially necessary atrocities.
This is, I think, for many people, the most difficult section of the novel to get through. The structure here is that belief provides immediate and total justification for almost anything. For those who are truly committed, Pilar, Anselmo, Augustan ideology gives them the narrative frame they need to transform extreme, repugnant violence into moral righteousness. It becomes a function of historical destiny.
And we get that horrifying account from Pilar about the town execution of fascists right at the beginning of the war. The incentive here, as Pilar explains it, was shared guilt and collective commitment.
Yes. She says the execution was organized that each man should have his share in the responsibility.
Wow.
It's a really sophisticated systemic maneuver when you think about it. It ensures that the moral burden is deliberately spread among the entire populace. It transforms what could have been a spontaneous act of vengeance into a kind of civic revolutionary ritual.
So by making everyone complicit.
By making everyone complicit, the system binds them all together. It ensures that they are collectively invested in the continued success of the Republic, because the cost of failure now includes their shared, unforgivable crime.
It's normalization through participation.
Exactly. And the human outcome is the rapid normalization of atrocity, which is then accompanied by this immense psychological debt for those who participate, even for those who truly believe in the cause.
And Hemingway does not spare us a single detail in Pilar's account. It's so graphic. The men who were marched out, they weren't shot cleanly. They were clubbed, beaten with flails and sickles.
It's awful. Pilar describes the scene. The men were shouting and clubbing and stabbing, and men were screaming as horses scream in a fire. You get this sensory overload, the smell of vomit and spilled wine, the disorganized chaos.
This wasn't clean, distant military warfare. This was raw, decentralized cruelty between neighbors. It was designed to be brutal and personal.
And the impact on the participants is immediate. You see the peasant Joaquin moments after he takes part in this horror, and he's just reduced to tears, saying, "I have never killed anyone." The system, through this ritual, ensured that the act of killing was not exceptional, but expected. It became a requirement for ideological purity and for membership in the revolutionary community.
And Anselmo, he's like the walking embodiment of this psychological debt, isn't he?
He really is. He confirms that in war, we must kill. But he doesn't do it with any pleasure.
Yeah.
He's the pure idealist, forced into the system of
He
atrocity.
still sees it as a sin.
He still regards killing a man as a great sin, and he believes he'll need civic penance after the war is over. It's like a spiritual payment for a revolutionary debt.
But he's wrestling with a system that has explicitly rejected God. Anselmo himself says, since we do not have God here anymore, who forgives,
What a question.
the system forces the individual to become his own judge and his own executioner at the same time. He has to intellectually accept the necessity of the act, while his conscience is just screaming at him about the act itself. That is the constant grinding pressure exerted by this moral accelerator.
It accelerates the necessary action by providing this abstract destination, the Republic. But it gives you no mechanism for cleanup, no mechanism for forgiveness. The system just says, the cost is necessary, pay it, and keep functioning. Anselmo's desire for penance is an individual's desperate attempt to reconcile with a system that demands moral bankruptcy in the name of moral tyranny.
So if ideology is the accelerator, then the system's human element, connection and loyalty, that's what intensifies the cost of participating in this machine to almost unbearable levels.
The structural shift here is just so intense. Jordan arrives as a cold instrument. He's focused only on the wire, the dynamite, the timing. That's it.
The mission.
The mission. But the arrival of Maria and the brotherhood he develops with Anselmo and Augustine, that injects this intense, deeply personal human reality right back into the cold military calculus.
And the incentive, it just shifts dramatically. It moves from this abstract political loyalty to intensely personal meaning and protection.
Right. Jordan realizes he loves Maria as I love all that we have fought for. His personal relationship with her and his deep respect for Anselmo and Pilar, they're now completely inextricably linked to the cause itself.
So this personal investment, it makes the objective profoundly meaningful. It gives the bridge a reason beyond just being coordinates on a map.
But it equally magnifies the psychological cost of the inevitable sacrifice. All of a sudden, Jordan realizes the orders he accepted so stoically from Goltz are actually bad orders, all right, for this old man Anselmo, and certainly for Maria.
And the human outcome of that realization is just intensified fear and sorrow, which Jordan then has to actively fight against.
He has to consciously shed his self, that part of him that feels and fears, and he has to return to his role as the instrument where there could be no self. He even observes that soldiers often convert sorrow into hatred just to keep fighting.
A kind of psychological defense mechanism?
It's a defense mechanism that's required by the system just to maintain operational readiness.
And this idea of functional loyalty is so key here. Jordan is a communist, but he says it's only for the duration of the war. He realizes that this business is very corrupting, and that at some point he's been tainted with the joy of killing.
Yeah.
Yet he reasons that nobody owns his mind, but you were under communist discipline for the duration of the war. And why? Because they offered the best discipline for prosecuting the war.
That's such a profound point about organizational requirements, isn't it? Functional loyalty trumps your personal philosophical objections when survival is on the line.
Right.
He views the communists not as some moral or ideological ideal, but as the most efficient structure for winning the war he already believes in.
So he accepts the baggage.
He accepts all of it. The lying, the political purges, the moral corruption as necessary operational costs that just have to be temporarily held in abeyance.
And speaking of those necessary operational costs, that brings us to the part of the book that most fully exposes the systemic rot happening above the field.
The system of internal politics and bureaucratic stasis. This is exactly why Goltz was so cynical from the start.
The structure here is what you might call the deep state of the revolution. And we see this stark contrast between the idealism and the purity of the front lines, that crusade feeling at the 5th Regiment headquarters, and the debilitating cynicism of the rear, specifically at Gaylord's Hotel in Madrid.
Gaylord's is where Jordan learns the hard truth. The truth about the lying, the necessity of manufacturing these heroic peasant leaders like El Campesino, and the omnipresent, paralyzing internal political purges. Jordan notes that the lying was a very corrupting business, but he understood it was just part of being an insider and keeping the system functional.
Or at least appearing functional.
Or at least appearing functional, yeah.
Yeah.
The core incentive at the rear is all about political purity and suspicion, which completely overrides military efficacy. The internal political struggle, communists battling anarchists, the paranoia around Trotskyites and the POM, it drives this paralyzing suspicion.
And this wasn't just minor squabbling. This factionalism consumed vital energy and led to fatal bureaucratic delay.
And we see this play out in just agonizing detail when Andres and Gomez are carrying Jordan's urgent message, this vital field intelligence about the enemy concentration to Gultz.
They just run into one roadblock after another.
A series of paralyzing checkpoints, and they ultimately land in front of the political officer, Andre Marty.
And Marty, who was a real historical figure, notoriously paranoid within the international brigades, he represents pure systemic obstruction.
He doesn't prioritize the message at all. He prioritizes suspicion.
He immediately sees the message as a fabrication. His paranoia is pathological, and it's entirely systemic. He questions the men's loyalty, the chain of command, asking, "How did you know Goltz was here?"
He even asks the guard to arrest them both, and implies they should be liquidated, asking if the officer wants a drink before he finally reports to Goltz. The lives of Andres and Gomez and the fate of the entire Segovia offensive are delayed and threatened because Marty's incentive structure prioritizes ideological conformity over processing critical military intelligence.
One of the corporals even describes Marty as having a mania de fusilagente, a mania for shooting people and for purifying more than salvarsan, which was a medicine used to treat syphilis.
He embodies the political machine prioritizing ideological purity and suspicion above everything else. And in doing so, he ensures that the vital intelligence is fatally delayed. The central command structure failed the man in the field, just as Goltz expected it would.
And the narrator gives us that final damning systemic observation.
That's right. Even if Marty hadn't hindered them, the great inertia of military operations, once they're initiated, is almost as hard to stop as it is to start. The system, once it's turned on, once the orders are written and the troops are moving, it can't easily be shut down by rational field intelligence.
The machine dictates the terms.
The machine dictates the terms, not the men running it.
Okay, let's try to explicitly map the system we've just outlined. It feels like we're seeing 4 key categories of actors and structures operating within this whole conflict.
I think that's right. First, you have the fighters. These are people like Anselmo, Agustin, and Maria. They are the essential instruments of belief. They're driven by direct loyalty and physical action, and they bear the overwhelming physical and psychological costs.
And Anselmo, specifically, he represents that pure idealist who is still looking for atonement, that civic penance, for the system's necessity of killing.
Then second, you have the commanders. Goltz, Pablo, and Marty. They're all system administrators, but they're operating with wildly different incentives. Goltz is the cynical professional, expecting systemic failure and compensating by issuing these extreme, difficult orders.
Pablo is the localized administrator, prioritizing his own localized capital, his horses, over the macro cause.
And Marty is the politically fanatical administrator who prioritizes purges and suspicion over actual military success.
Okay, who else?
Third, the civilians. They're the wider populace whose lives are just destroyed. Joaquin's family, Maria's parents, and whose loyalty is what feeds the cause. They're the raw material for this system's narrative. And finally, you have the ideological movements themselves, the Republic, communism, anarchy. They provide the overarching narrative structure that demands allegiance and sacrifice, and they're what converts all this chaos into some kind of meaning.
And what binds them all together are these key incentives. We see this continuous, brutal tension between survival, obedience, and symbolic sacrifice.
The primary tension, like we saw with Jordan and Pablo, is between individual survival and organizational obedience. Jordan accepts Goltz's impossible orders because he believes in the Republic's necessity, while Pablo prioritizes his safety and fleeing the attack. It's the constant battle between the individual system and the organizational system.
And the system demands symbolic sacrifice to maintain its own momentum. Maria's father's final words, "Viva la República," as he was shot, that transforms his death into a symbol of resistance to cruelty.
Death becomes currency for the cause. It fuels the commitment of those left behind and justifies further action.
And all of this is held up by the narratives, these narratives of necessity, like, we must win this war before you can ever return to your house, and the use of political slogans like, resistir y fortificar es vencer.
They serve a vital function. They simplify a complex moral reality. They mask the ugliness of the required actions, and they replace critical thinking with motivational dogma.
And that simplification feeds this vicious feedback loop, doesn't it? Violence leads to justification, which leads to persistence.
Exactly. The violence inflicted by the fascists, the execution of Joaquin's family, the brutality of Sordo's decapitation, it feeds the moral justification for the Republican retaliation. We hunt as much as we are hunted, as they say. It's a self-perpetuating system of required escalation.
Which brings us back to that central analytical question. Why do the participants keep going when they recognize the human cost, the corruption, and the sheer absurdity of the bureaucracy, like Andres' terrifying encounter with Marty?
The system persists because the participants believe the alternative defeat means the loss of everything they love. Liberty, dignity, the republic itself. That makes the current system, however flawed and corrupting it is, the only viable path.
It's the only game in town.
It is. As Jordan thinks, if this war is lost, all those things are lost. The systemic corruption, the lying, the political infighting, it's all seen as necessary baggage that has to be put in abeyance until the larger existential goal is achieved. It's a choice between a recognized evil and what they perceive as total annihilation.
It's incredible how the dynamics that Hemingway mapped out back in 1937 Spain are not just isolated historical curiosities. They are structurally recurrent. You see them across time and conflict, and they deeply inform modern systems.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
We see the structural recurrence of insurgency dynamics endlessly. The tension between the localized safety of the guerrilla band, Pablo's concerns, and the demands of a centralized macro-military plan, Goltz's needs, that is a continuous feature of modern decentralized conflict.
You see it everywhere.
Whether you look at conflicts in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, the distrust is structural. Local groups prioritize their long-term survival and their accumulated capital, whether it's resources, loyalty, or weapons caches, over the sudden high-risk demands of a distant command that they often perceive as incompetent.
Pablo's principle of the fox is timeless.
It really is. And this brings us back to that idea of organizational loyalty under extreme conditions. Jordan's choice to adopt a suspension of his own moral judgment to function effectively is structurally common in high-stakes organizations, military or otherwise.
He admits nobody owns his mind.
But he accepted communist discipline for the duration of the war. That distinction is paramount. Functional loyalty over ideological belief. You might intellectually recognize that the system is corrupt or even morally compromised, but you adopt functional loyalty because the immediate mission, the specific objective, is the ultimate priority.
Jordan knows the business of demolition is sound, but that constant need for self-censorship, the attempt to approximate the cold conditions of a successful assassination.
That's the functional requirement of that system.
Furthermore, you can see how modern political systems, not just revolutionary ones, rely on framing required action and even death as a kind of moral obligation. You can contrast Anselmo's desire for atonement and civic penance with the system's focus on uncritical necessity and rhetoric. The system focuses on simplifying the moral reality through slogans and the narrative of historical destiny, demanding uncritical obedience until the war is won.
The state, or the revolutionary command structure, it converts the messy, bloody, individual act of killing into a clean, necessary function of the collective destiny. It's like a bureaucratic process of moral cleansing, where the individual is told, you are not a killer, you are an instrument of historical necessity.
So now let's explicitly link this study back to our core themes here in Crisis and Perception. This book is just a masterclass in how systems can override individual agency.
The most potent theme, for me, is the system overpowering individual moral agency. You have Robert Jordan, this intellectual who believes in liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and he accepts the discipline and methods of a system that he knows involves lying and corruption, that very corrupting business he talks about.
His internal monologue is just a constant, exhausting battle, isn't it? A battle against the system's demands on his conscience.
It is. He's constantly trying to maintain this mental partition. He tries to separate the political necessity from the psychological toll. He tries to tell himself, you never kill anyone that you want to kill in a war, he said to himself. Well, hardly ever, he amended. The system forced him to confront that ultimate reality. Whether he liked it or not, he was capable of and effective at killing. The system provided the theater for that capability to be realized.
And then there is that crucial issue of perception under pressure. The belief structures filter reality. They create a kind of necessary delusion just to maintain function.
Andre Marty's pathological paranoia, seeing every field operative as a potential Trotskyite or an enemy agent, it's a massive systemic flaw. But it's a flaw that the rest of the Republican Army has to just ignore to maintain morale and cohesion. They have to perceive their leadership as unified and rational, even when it is demonstrably not.
The refusal to acknowledge the internal flaws or the absurdity of the bureaucracy, the message delay, the constant suspicion, it's essential for maintaining the drive.
They must believe that their system, however chaotic and corrupt, is fundamentally superior and historically correct. Otherwise, the engine just stops running. That delusion is a systemic requirement.
And finally, there's the narrative justification for violence. The system relies on framing the enemy as inherently less human. The people of the auto de fe, the act of faith, the people who burn heretics and torture. It does this to make the act of killing intellectually palatable.
It frames the enemy as an absolute evil that just has to be surgically removed.
But that intellectual necessity, it contrasts so sharply with the ugly feeling of actually killing someone. Jordan realizes that the Spaniards on both sides, they have this old suppressed extra sacrament of killing that they bring out in wars.
Right. The system doesn't introduce the violence. It legitimizes and amplifies the existing human capacity for it by giving it this grand historical narrative.
It's the only way to sustain continuous, intense conflict. You have to frame the enemy's actions, shooting Joaquin's family, Maria's parents, as barbarous, while justifying your own equally violent response. The execution at the cliff, the bridge demolition, as a necessary function of liberty and historical destiny.
It's the constant necessary contrast of cruelty.
So as we conclude this deep dive, what does For Whom the Bell Tolls ultimately teach you, the listener, about these large ideological systems when you view them through the lens of Robert Jordan's Few Days in the Mountains?
Well, first, I think we learned that ideology functions as a framework that converts your personal conviction into systemic obligation. And in doing so, it often overrides your personal ethics. It makes the impossible or the repugnant feel necessary, not in spite of your beliefs, but because of them.
Second, we see that loyalty is constantly being tested. It's this dynamic tension between local, immediate, and intimate ties, Maria, Pablo's band, Anselmo, and the distant, often compromised macro cause of the Republic and its corrupt command structure.
The system forces you to choose between the intimate and the abstract.
And third, sacrifice. It's not a moment of heroism or exceptional courage in the system. It is normalized, expected, and continuously demanded just to maintain the system's inertia and its forward momentum. The system requires men like Anselmo who find that civic duty has to replace their religious faith, even while they're lamenting the sin of killing.
This is a book that leaves us not with simple solutions or some clean moral victory, but with painful, permanent knowledge about human nature when it's put under extreme systemic pressure.
And Robert Jordan, in his final moments, reflects on the sheer complexity of the moral landscape that the war has revealed to him.
He recognizes the profound value of the fight, the intense beauty of the world he is leaving, and the personal luck he had in finding Maria, even if the relationship was compressed into just 72 hours. He says, "The world is a fine place and worth the fighting for, and I hate very much to leave it. And you had a lot of luck," he told himself, "to have had such a good life."
But the final observation, that painful systemic knowledge that transcends the self, is the realization that the system contains all truths simultaneously. He thinks about the good parts, Madrid rising white and beautiful, and the ugly parts, Pilar's story of the old women drinking the blood at the slaughterhouse.
And he concludes that despite the complexity, the corruption, and the violent contradictions, the great lesson is this: there's no one thing that's true. It's all true. That was Ernest Hemingway, Pulitzer Prize winner in 1953 and Nobel Prize for Literature winner in 1954. If you have not read the book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, we highly encourage you to do so.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.